One thing I've noticed with my generation religiously is that we love tradition. And I think a big part of this is the great crisis of our time is a crisis of truth and crisis of meaning. The world tells you there is no truth, there is no meaning. And as I've spoken about before on the channel, I think, we are in an age of mass demonic warfare. I mean, we always have been because the Bible even says that we're fighting against demons. But I think at the current moment, we are in a massive age of spiritual darkness, but also the beginnings of mass spiritual reawakening. And I think at the current time, truth and tradition matter a great deal because what tradition does is that it doesn't just make you and your Bible. You are a part of a tradition much older than you, much larger than you. And you have something to root yourself on. You have something to make yourself more credible. You have something to learn from. They're your ancestors. You can learn from them. And that's why increasingly on this channel, it's not the only thing I talk about. The primary focus of this channel is spreading Christian Universalism. But the secondary focus of this channel, and what I think is hand in hand with that goal, is preserving Universalist heritage, particularly Universalist Protestant heritage. And I think increasingly in this age of a need for tradition, that Universalists must reawaken our own tradition because there's so much the Universalist Church has to offer, still has to offer. And last night I've read books, I've read articles, I've seen videos about the Universalist Church, and I've often wondered how can the most biblical form of Christianity there is, Universalist Christianity, downfall into the most unbiblical thing there is, the Unitarian Universalist Association. And a large part of that is the Unitarians, but still, it really makes you wonder how the Universalists get that bad that they married with the Unitarians into that unholy abomination that is the Unitarian Universalist Association. I frequently pray for them. God help them. And I rewatched this video last night. It's called Memories of Universalism. It's a brief little thing on the Love Unrelenting channel. Great channel. If you don't know about him, he is a great YouTube channel, Universalist YouTube channel. Personally, my favorite. Great channel. And this is a great video. It's called Memories of Universalism. After you're done with this video, please look up this video and rewatch it again. It's an amazing video. I don't know. It really stuck with me. And then it just doesn't have a lot of views, and I would like to see more views on it because it's a really great video. Well, I'm just going to play the whole thing, and then I'm going to talk about it because I think it's the best telling of the downfall of the Universalist Church I've seen. It's just, I don't know, it's really stuck with me.
Early Universalists used to like to argue through all this stuff, and some of them were called ultras, and some of them were called restorationists. We were restorationists, and we said that it's Christ that saves you, not merely the fact that 2,000 years ago things were all worked out, and that when you die you just go up to heaven. So the other side was known as Death and Glory Universalists, because what basically puts you into heaven is the fact that you die. And we said, no, faith and repentance are necessary. And so I've noticed over the years that the Universalist churches that were restorationists kept Christ at the center of their faith and practice, and clearly that's the case here. Around the time of the Civil War, just before this building was constructed, the Universalists came out with prayer books, which to the casual observer looks like the Anglican Book of Prayer. It's a very Book of Common Prayer. It's very close to that. And the idea was it was a more of an ecumenical thing for the Universalists to be able to deal with folks of different Christian backgrounds, with an eye to the United States centennial coming up about 10 years later. So the first of these prayer books, which you see in our pews, was put out in 1865, and two of my predecessors here, the Reverend Drs. Capon and Cushman. Dr. Cushman is a fellow Dartmouth man, and they were two of the three that put these prayer books together for the denomination nationally. And I've had stories like a colleague of mine was a First Universalist in Minneapolis, which is now would consider itself a humanist congregation, and he finds hundreds of these books in the closet. So they used to use these things. So that was kind of the predominant thing. After World War I, the leadership changed, things changed, and a lot of Universalist churches started to slide off of Christianity. The denomination tried to get into the federal, now national council of churches, but the application didn't go anywhere because the leadership at the time couldn't say, well, we have professions of faith, we're Christians, and some of the other denominations says, I don't know, can you show us? And So that didn't work out, and it wasn't too well handled, candidly. And this is around World War II. And so, whereas we're one of the founders of the Rhode Island State Council of Churches here, I think that's 1934. In fact, our guy was a president of the congregation here for 35 years, was a Superior Court Justice, Judge Fred Perkins, and he was one of the first presidents of the State Council of Churches. It was incorporated in his law office downtown here. The logo of the Universalist Church of America, adopted around 1870s, is from Revelation 17, verse 14. Christ will conquer. They will make war on the Lamb, and he will overcome them. He will conquer them, for he is King of kings and Lords of lords, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. That's the verse. Christ will conquer. And I had when I first came to town here, one of our members at the time was a third generation Universalist, fifth generation Rhode Islander, and that logo was on his baptismal certificate. He was about 50 years old at the time. Whereas when you read the history, nobody talks about that stuff. But when you're serving a church, you're looking to find those shards, and some of it's literally in the woodwork here. I would find documents where it was important here. I will never forget. Somebody said to me I've had people that have come here from Universalist churches that have closed, and she came in and we were saying the Winchester profession, that like we always do, and she says, I didn't even have to read the words. I knew them all by heart. She says, we used to say that all the time, and then they took it away from us. That's how she put it. I never forgot that. To God, what some of these folks have gone through, just never having their faith reaffirmed, just being praised for being progressives and liberals and inclusive, as opposed to, when I told one of our former deacons, now deceased, that we didn't, that a lot of our churches had stopped doing communion, and he says, well, are they in this for God, or are they in this for themselves? That's the reaction. People knew. These aren't trained, college-educated people, but they knew a lot more about the gospel than a lot of people I knew in seminary. So it's really it's always made a great impression on me when I would get these stories from folks. So I'm really just so happy to be here, really. It's not a picnic being downtown in a capital city with all the disruptions and pressures that involves, but it's just wonderful. It's a great place to do Christian ministry out of.
I think what makes that video so different than just about anything else about the Universalist Church is it has the accounts of lay people, and you just don't find that really anywhere else. Lay people, their take on the fall. And I think he gave part of an explanation that, a lot of Universalists, some of them weren't practicing biblical Christianity because we had a congregational government. But many of them were, and it's just really stuck with me because, especially now, I'm seeing this Operation Reconquista movement I've talked about before on the channel. And all these guys, they're just, they're bringing back their traditions. They're going back to their founders. They're going back to the great saints of their traditions. They're going back to their professions, confessions, creeds, articles, whatever. And, they're trying to bring back their tradition, trying to bring back their church. And it's just, for me, I can't even imagine what that'd be like. I mean, from going from a church that preaches solid biblical Christianity to a church that says we're not even going to read the Bible in church anymore. We're not going to do communion anymore. We're not going to baptize anymore. I can't even imagine how, evil. What that one woman said, that really stuck with me. We used to say that all the time, and then they took it away from us. And really, the fall of the church, it was a top-down move. The devil got into the seminaries, and everything went from there. And it was a multi-decade-long affair. But, eventually they ended up marrying the Unitarian Church, and the Unitarian Church is evil. They don't believe Jesus is God, and it's an evil religion. It's just, for me, it's evil. And, for a long time, I just acted like, oh, well, the Universalist Church is dead and buried. It's sad what happened, but we just kind of, got to move on. But the more I studied the tradition, the more I really fell in love with the great men of the church, and the more I read the documents like the Winchester Profession, the more I came to realize that this tradition is not dead. It is on life support, yes, but it is not dead. There are still Universalist churches today throughout the country. They're scattered and small, but they're around. And more importantly, there are still people that believe. Most of the audience of this channel believe and still believe. And preserving that form of Christianity, I think, is paramount. Preserving the religion of our forefathers is paramount. And just for me, our tradition matters so much. It's just for me, it's not a dead tradition, is what I'm trying to say. Like, that faith is not dead. It is not gone. I know a lot of people try to convince you that it's a dead faith, it's a gone faith. It doesn't exist anymore, but it's still alive. It's small, it's weak, and really the point of this channel, so much of it is keeping that tradition alive. There's a little flame, and I'm trying to make it big again. I can't do it alone, of course. That's only through God's grace, but I think that we can reestablish this tradition, because the reason the Universalist Church fell is because the devil absolutely hated it. It was preaching true Christianity. I've said it before on the channel. I know it's a little out there, but one time I had a dream, because the question of why is Universalism so hated in the Christian world really bothered me. Like, why? And it came to in the dream, I had the realization that the devil doesn't want it to be so. That the devil, demons, dark powers, whatever you want to say, want the doctrine of eternal damnation to stay strong in the church. They want this to remain the doctrine of the Christian church, because that evil doctrine perverts the view of God. And I'm not saying that people aren't Christian if they aren't Universalists, not at all. In fact, many non-Universalist Christians are better Christians than I. But we are preaching, true biblical Christianity, the faith of the fathers. Many of the early church fathers believed in this. But the reason why I'm so drawn to the old Universalist church is because they were a lot like us. Like, most of the viewers watching, like, we can admire, apostolic Christians in the first few centuries of the church, but at the same time, we don't really relate with them. You know what I mean? Like, really, I think you can divide Universalist history into two parts. There is the time when we were Orthodox, the first 500 years when we were accepted by the mainstream Christian world, and then there's been the last 1,500 years when we were heretics, when the mainstream Christian world utterly hates us. And I've really fallen in love with the Universalists, like, as a people, because they put up with persecution and adversity. I've talked about before my hero, John Murray, Reverend John Murray. He was almost killed a few times for preaching the gospel. And these people, our Universalist ancestors, they fought so hard to preach the gospel. All they wanted was what we want, to preach the gospel, the true gospel of universal salvation. And they built churches and institutions and schools and seminaries to do that. And it was slowly ripped away from them by heretics. Just what that woman said, it really stuck with me. Like, we used to say it all the time until they took it away from us. It was taken away from us. It was ripped. It was a faith taken from us. And I thank God for churches like First Universalist Church in Providence, Rhode Island, because they are some of the few bastion churches left. And it's just, our tradition matters. I really have come to realize that keeping the Universalist Church alive, even if it's small and it's weak, we must do it, because they fought for the same thing we're fighting for, the true gospel, and spreading it. And they were very successful once. I've talked about it before. At the height of the church, there were 800,000 members. The Universalist Church was very successful. There was a time when people were reading our books, when we were having a big influence. And I think it can be done again. We are in a very similar spot that we were before the founding of the Universalist Church, where people are becoming Universalists from everywhere, just all different Christian traditions. And with the internet, our ability to reach people is so much easier, not to mention all the transportation technology and everything else that we can do in the modern day that people in the 18th century just could not. And just preserving this tradition, I think, it's not a dead tradition. I've been to a lot of churches in my day, like all different denominations, and I kept running into a problem. It's like, there are churches that are friendly to Universalism, but being friendly to Universalism is not the same as preaching Universalism. Or if they do preach Universalism, it's this watered down Universalism that isn't the true biblical Universalism. It's this God's too mean to damn anybody kind of Universalism, this liberal Universalism. And it's just, I realized that I know this is going to sound a little weird, but when I go into these other churches, even though I know I have to eventually join one because I need the word and the sacraments for my very soul, I feel like I'm committing adultery. I don't. I know this is a bit weird to say, but it's like I'm a Christian Universalist. That's what I believe. That is my creed. That is what I preach. And I go into all these different churches, and they all have a fragmented gospel. You know, the more conservative churches, they get certain parts of the gospel right, and then the liberal churches, they get certain parts of the gospel right, and then some of the moderate churches, you know, they get some of the gospel right, but yeah, it's still fragmented gospel. It's like pick your poison. And just for me, it's like I don't want to pick my poison. I want to continue to preach the faith that was and still is. And for me, I just, because the devil destroyed the Universal Church because he hated it. And I think completely abandoning tradition, things like abandoning the Winchester profession, abandoning the great saints of the Universalist Church like John Murray is doing what the devil wants, because he wants the Universalist Church gone. He wants our memory forgotten. And I just think that reforming Christianity is so important. I think keeping our tradition alive is so. It's not a dead tradition. That's what I realized. I identify as Universalist in the classical sense. I identify with the Universalist Church. If you ask me my creed, it's the Winchester Profession of 1803. I see myself as a part of that church. Now, is there any institutional Universalist church near me? No. But I'm a part of that church. I continue to believe it. I continue to preach it. I'm a part of it. Maybe I'm not officially on the roster somewhere, but this is the tradition I believe in, and this is the tradition I preach. Is it small? Is it weak? Yes. But remember what the minister said: Christ will conquer. The devil and all the evil spirits and all that are waging war on the Lamb. But we have to remember that Christ will conquer in the end. The collapse of the Universalist Church we saw in the mid-20th century is just a setback. And one day we will rebuild. One day we will conquer with God's help. And I do believe that brighter days are ahead of us. I'm not sure what. I'm not sure if a new Universalist denomination would just come up out of the ashes. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I do believe that we need to return to our tradition. We need to read the old professions. We need to read the old confessions. I've been reading the autobiography of Reverend John Murray when I have the free time. And I really love Reverend John Murray. I don't fully agree with him. He was an ultra Universalist, but he was a Trinitarian, so it wasn't as bad. But he had this devotion. He would go around towns. He'd go into pulpits that were not Universalists, and he would kind of preach this undercover Universalism. He was almost killed a few times, but he kept on. He kept on preaching. He kept on teaching. John Murray's an incredible man. His wife and his children died. Child died. He moved to America. I find him very inspiring. He only kept preaching because a miracle happened to him. I find the man amazing. And there's other great Universalists of the past. The thing is, the Universalist Church actually left us a lot of great books. If you go online, you'll find a bunch of free books, just free to read. You don't even need to buy them, whatever. They're like free on archives and stuff. Free to read, old books about Universalism. I think those are golden. We've been kept a bunch of professions and confessions. And we have prayer books. We have prayer books. Universalist worship was what we would call middle church worship. It's the kind of worship you would find in a church like a Methodist church or a United Church of Christ. And I think that keeping this tradition alive, realizing that it's not a dead tradition, it's a weak tradition, but it's not dead. And I think that if God could do it once in the 18th century without our fancy technology we have today, I think God could do it again. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is the tradition of the church matters. Our tradition matters. We need to keep the tradition alive. It's not a dead tradition. It's a living tradition. And, I've been doing a lot of research on the matter. Okay. I've been doing a lot of research on the matter. For instance, I found some interesting facts. You see this symbol here? It's called the All-Sinner Cross. You'll see it in a bunch of Universalist circles. Don't use this symbol. This was developed in the 1940s, 1946. By those Universalists I talked about that abandoned the faith. Those same Universalists you heard about in that little video that stopped doing communion, abandoned Christianity. Yeah, they invented this. You know what this all-center cross means? The cross, of course, represents Christianity, but it's off-center. And what's that circle mean? That circle means all religions. It means all, it pretty much is saying all roads lead to God. And what that symbol is saying is that Universalism is historically Christian, and we admire our Christian roots, but we are not Christian anymore. We are moving beyond Christianity. That's why I don't use this symbol. That's why I continue to use the old symbol of the Universalist Church, a symbol that actually means something. Christ will conquer. It has the Bible on it. It has the cross at the center. There's a lot of rich meaning in that old little symbol, and that's why I continue to use it. And is God bless, and I would like to end by reading that old document. I might stutter a little bit by reading it, but I am going to read it. The Winchester Profession of 1803, because they took away the Winchester Profession from that woman, and that really stuck with me. I said that's a big reason why I made this video. Is we used to say it all the time until they took it away from us, and I think this is the heart of the Protestant Universalist tradition. We have been saying this document for over 220 years now. I mean, Lewis and Clark were in the West when we wrote this thing, and it is the heart of our faith. I highly recommend you use it in other similar documents. We believe that the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament contain a revelation of the character of God and of the duty and interest and final destination of mankind. We believe that there is one God whose nature is love, revealed in one Jesus Christ by one Holy Spirit of grace, who will finally restore the whole family of mankind to wholeness and happiness. We believe that wholeness and happiness and true happiness are inseparably connected, and that believers ought to be careful to maintain order and good practice, good works, for these things are good and profitable unto men. That's what we believe. It's a little bit simplistic, but that is the heart of our faith. And remember, that is not dead. We're not dead. We need to return to our tradition, and we need to remember our faith. We need to keep on with the faith. We need to remember the faith and keep it alive, because it's not dead, it's just weak.